They thought my parents were just another helpless couple they could push around. But one lawyer and one brilliant sentence turned their arrogance into total humiliation. Imagine saving everything you have to build your dream home, only to watch a crooked builder and a greedy bank destroy it. They lied, they bullied, and they thought they'd win. But they had no idea my parents were about to serve the sweetest revenge of all. Hit like, tap, follow, and get ready. Because this story proves one thing: never underestimate the quiet ones. A year painted in the soft haze of memory. A time before emails. Before skyscraper banks, when people trusted handshakes more than contracts. My parents were young then. My father was 27, with calloused hands and quiet eyes. The kind of man who worked hard and spoke little. My mother was 24, gentle, warm, always smiling through the kind of tiredness only mothers of two small children could know. They lived in a cramped rental, one of those houses where the wallpaper curled at the corners and the pipes rattled like bones in the night. Every morning my dad laced up his boots before sunrise and whispered to my mom, "Just a little longer, honey. I'll get us our own place soon." That dream, their own home, a place built with love, kept them going through the exhaustion. When they finally saved enough for a small down payment, it felt like the world had opened. The local bank in town's a little two-story brick building with peeling, white paint and a dusty sign that said Farmers and Merchants Bank and approved their mortgage. The banker, a man named Mr. Carlson, shook my dad's hand with that overly firm grip that small town businessmen think proves something. "Don't you worry, son," he said with a practiced smile. "You'll be in your new house before the leaves turn." And with that, the dream began. The bank recommended a contractor named Bob, one of the best builders in the county, Carlson promised. Bob was big, loud, and wore mirrored sunglasses even indoors. The kind of man who slapped your back hard when he laughed. My parents, young and trusting, believed him. They signed the papers, and the bank cut Bob a check to begin construction. At first, everything seemed fine. The land and a modest patch of earth outside town was quiet, surrounded by rolling hills and oak trees. My mother used to bring the kids there, holding them up to watch the workers hammering and framing. She imagined where the kitchen would be, where she'd hang the curtains, where the kids would take their first steps on the grass. Hope filled the air. But soon the excitement turned to confusion. Bob started missing days. His crew, mostly teenagers and untrained, laborers, and made mistakes my father didn't understand. Still, he tried to stay patient. Until one evening, he stopped by after work and found two of the workers arguing. One was holding a blueprint upside down. "You boys okay here?" Dad asked carefully. Yeah," one of them mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just not sure if this wall's supposed to go through the tub or not." Dad blinked. Through the tub? He brushed it off at first. Surely they'd fix it. Surely Bob knew what he was doing. But that night, as he told my mom what he saw, she laughed nervously and said, "Oh, they're probably just joking." She wanted to believe that. They both did. The next morning, she drove to the site again. The laughter stopped when she pulled up. Boards were stacked wrong, nails left half-driven, and someone had scribbled "fix later" on a wall beam in chalk. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Still, she said nothing. They were polite people, the kind who brought cookies to the workers and thanked them after every visit. She told herself that being patient and kind would make it all okay. But kindness, she would soon learn, doesn't protect you from greed. The first red flag came when the bank called. A woman from the mortgage department said brightly, "Just confirming the next payment to Mr. Bob for construction progress." My mom hesitated. "But the house isn't finished." "Oh, that's not a problem," the woman said. "He's marked this phase as complete." Something in my mother's chest sank. Marked complete? The walls weren't even straight. The windows weren't in. And the roof, it leaked after the first rainstorm. That night, my dad sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on anger. They're paying him without checking the damn work. What do we do? Mom whispered. We trust them, he said after a long silence. They're the bank. They'll make it right. He didn't know that would be the last time he said those words. Weeks passed. The mistakes multiplied. The architect had forgotten to erase a line on the blueprints, and the framers built a wall through the bathtub. The kitchen cabinets? Attached to drywall, not studs, held up by a few roofing nails. The garage door? Framed into the living room instead of facing the driveway. Each new discovery chipped away at my parents' hope until all that was left was exhaustion. My mom stopped visiting the site because it made her cry. My dad started coming home later, trying to work overtime to cover costs that weren't supposed to exist. And then one day Bob vanished. No calls, no visits, just his clueless minions wandering around like lost sheep. By late autumn, the house was a patchwork disaster, and the bank wanted signatures. We need to finalize, Mr. Thompson, the bank rep said. Time's money. I'm not signing anything until the house is built right. That's not how it works, son. That word, son, burned in my father's chest. He hung up the phone and stared out the window at nothing for a long time. Something inside him shifted that day. He didn't know it yet. But the fight of his life had just begun. The first snow of that winter fell like ashes, soft, silent, and cold enough to sting. My mother watched it through the fogged kitchen window of the rental house, holding a cup of instant coffee that had long gone lukewarm. Out there, somewhere past the fields, sat their half-finished dream. Tilting, leaking, and mocking them. Every morning she called Bob's office. Every morning the secretary chirped, "He's out on a site, ma'am," then hung up before my mother could ask which one. She started keeping a notebook, names, dates, every promise and excuse scribbled in neat, desperate handwriting. Each page was a record of frustration disguised as patience. Meanwhile, my father was working himself raw. Day shift at the mill, night shift loading trucks. The kids hardly saw him. When he did come home, his eyes were rimmed in red and his hands smelled of steel and oil. They'd sit together at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. Papers spread between them like battlefield maps. "They're lying to us," he muttered one night. "Maybe if we just talk to the bank." "The bank doesn't care, Mary." His voice cracked on her name. "We're numbers to them." She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was sitting between them, silent and heavy. By February, the bank insisted on a final inspection. The representative, a thick-necked man in a gray coat who smelled of cigars, pulled up in a company car that looked far too shiny for those muddy country roads. He barely greeted my parents before striding toward the house. "So this is the Thompson place," he said, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Still needs finishing," Dad replied carefully. "We'll see about that." Inside, the cold wind whistled through cracks in the walls. Sawdust covered the floor like snow. The man rapped his knuckles on a kitchen cabinet. It wobbled. He frowned but said nothing. My mother pointed toward the ceiling where water stains spread like bruises. "It leaks," she said softly. "That's normal settling," he replied without looking up. When he reached for the front door to leave, he yanked it open and the entire frame, casing and all, came off in his hands. It fell forward and knocked him onto the porch. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Then my father's quiet voice broke the silence. "Still think it's ready for sign-off?" The man scrambled to his feet, face red, muttering about liability. He stormed to his car, slammed the door, and sped off, spraying mud all over my father's boots. That night the phone rang. It was Bob, his voice sharp with anger. "You embarrassed my man in front of the bank." "Your man?" "He's the one paying you." "Don't get smart, Thompson. You're lucky I'm even building this dump." The line went dead. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. "What are we going to do?" My father just stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. The next few weeks turned into psychological warfare. Bank letters came almost daily. thin envelopes that made my mother's stomach twist. Each one sounded more threatening than the last. Failure to sign will result in foreclosure proceedings. Delays may incur penalties. She tried to reason with them, driving into town with both kids bundled in the back seat. In the bank lobby, the secretary barely looked up. When the manager finally saw her, he smiled that tight, condescending smile people reserve for emotional women. Mrs. Thompson, construction always has hiccups. Let's be reasonable. A wall runs through my bathtub. Easily fixed. And the garage door. Let's not get dramatic. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen. Sign off and we'll make sure Bob takes care of those details afterward. She left the building shaking, cheeks burning with humiliation. Out in the car, her children were fighting over a toy. She looked at them and whispered, "We'll fix this. Mommy promises." That night, she cried into a dish towel so the kids wouldn't hear. Bob returned a week later, swaggering up the dirt drive like nothing was wrong. "All right, folks, let's get this wrapped up," he said, clapping his hands. He pretended to supervise his crew, men who still couldn't read the blueprints right side up. When my father pointed out mistakes, Bob laughed. "Close enough for country living." Something snapped in my father's chest. "You're cheating us," he said quietly. "Cheating? I'm saving you money. You're ruining our home. Your home isn't yours until you sign, remember that." Bob's grin was like a knife. He turned away, barking orders that made no sense, leaving behind the smell of sawdust and arrogance. By March, my mother stopped answering the phone altogether. Every ring meant either Bob's threats or the bank's pressure. She began to dread the mailman's footsteps on the porch. Her hair thinned. She barely ate. My father tried to be strong, but exhaustion made him brittle. He'd slam drawers, curse under his breath, then immediately apologize. "I'm sorry, Mary, I'm just tired." "I know," she'd whisper. "Me too." Their dream had turned into a slow-motion nightmare, an unending cycle of promises and betrayal. One evening, the final blow came. A registered letter from the bank. Notice of foreclosure intent. They were threatening to take everything. The kids played quietly on the floor while my parents sat frozen. My mother's hands shook as she unfolded the paper again and again, as if reading it enough times might change the words. "We'll lose it all," she said. "Not yet," my father answered, voice hoarse. "Not without a fight." That night he drove into town after midnight and parked outside a darkened law office, the only one with the light, still on upstairs. The sign read, "Thomas W. Grayson, attorney at law." He sat there for a long time, engine idling, heart pounding. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a building problem. It was war, and they needed someone who knew how to fight. He turned off the car, stepped into the cold night air, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we get help." The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself carried the same exhaustion my parents did. My father barely slept. He watched the window slowly lighten, his mind replaying the last few months. Bob's sneers, the bank's threats, his wife's quiet tears. He'd always believed that if you worked hard and kept your word, people would treat you fairly, but now, that belief was cracking, the same way their half-built walls were. When the clock struck 9, he kissed my mother's forehead and said softly, "I'm going to see that lawyer." Her eyes widened. "Can we afford it? Can we afford not to?" He left before she could answer. The law office was small and cluttered, tucked between a barber shop and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon. A single gold-lettered sign on the frosted glass door read, "T.W. Grayson, attorney at law." Inside, the air smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. Behind a desk sat a man in his late 40s with silvering hair and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. He looked up from a stack of files and smiled faintly. "You must be Mr. Thompson. Have a seat." My father handed him the folder of contracts, inspection notes, and photos he'd collected. Tom Grayson flipped through them silently, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Minutes passed. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of traffic outside. Finally, Tom exhaled. "Well," he said, leaning back, "this is a mess." My father nodded miserably. "We thought we were doing everything right. We made our payments, we trusted them." "You trusted people who don't deserve trust," Tom said. "That's not your fault. But it is your problem now." He began to ask questions, precise, surgical. Who owned the land? Whose name was on the deed? Who approved payments? Who signed each disbursement? By the end, Tom had filled a page of notes and sat in silence again, fingers steepled under his chin. "Mr. Thompson," he said finally, "do you have the deed to the land?" "Yes, we bought it ourselves before any of this started." "Good," Tom murmured, a glint sparking in his eyes. My father didn't know it yet, but that single answer would become the fuse to their salvation. That evening, back at the rental, the children were asleep when he told my mother what the lawyer had said. She listened quietly, clutching her mug of tea. "He says it's bad, Mary, real bad. But he's not giving up." "What does that mean?" "It means we've got one shot. Tomorrow he wants everyone in the same room. Bob, the bank, their lawyers, all of them." Her voice trembled. "Do you think it'll help?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But at least it's something. I can't stand sitting here waiting for them to ruin us." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time in months, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Resolve. That night, neither of them slept much. My mother packed the documents carefully, smoothing each page like it was fragile glass. My father paced the kitchen floor, his shadow long and restless in the weak light of a single bulb. They spoke in hushed tones, voices heavy with both fear and hope. "What if they laugh at us?" she whispered. "Then they laugh," he said. "But this time we won't be the ones backing down." It wasn't defiance born of anger. It was exhaustion turned into steel. When you've lost everything that can be taken from you, courage becomes the only thing left to lose. The next morning, the sky was blindingly clear, the kind of blue that almost hurt to look at. They drove into town in silence, the tires crunching over gravel. My mother sat rigid in her seat, clutching the file folder to her chest like armor. Inside the bank, polished marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights. It felt like another world, cold, indifferent, humming with quiet power. They were escorted into a conference room where everyone was already waiting. Bob sat there with his ever-present smirk, flanked by his attorney. Across from him, the bank's representative, Mr. Carlson, the same man who'd promised them everything, sat beside a stern-faced bank lawyer in a gray suit. And then there was Tom Grayson, calm and composed, carrying nothing but a single manila envelope. He greeted my parents softly. "You two just sit back and let me handle this." They sat at the far end of the table, hands clasped tightly under the surface. The room buzzed with tension. The bank's attorney began, his voice dripping with authority. "Let's get this over with. The Thompsons are in breach of contract. The bank and Mr. Bob have both suffered financial harm due to their delays." Bob nodded vigorously, his sunglasses perched arrogantly on his head. "They won't sign because they're picky. The house is fine. They're just being difficult." Tom didn't flinch. He let them talk, digging their own graves word by word. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Are you gentlemen finished?" The room fell silent. Tom stood smoothing his tie. "Good, because my clients have made a decision." He opened his envelope and pulled out a single document, placing it flat on the table. "They no longer want this house. Please remove it." There was a beat of stunned silence, then laughter. Bob snorted. The bank's attorney chuckled. Even Carlson allowed himself a smirk. "Remove it?" The lawyer scoffed. "You can't be serious." Tom's expression didn't change. "Entirely serious. My clients own the land outright. You've built a structure on property that does not belong to you. As of this moment, gentlemen, you are trespassing. The laughter stopped like someone had cut a wire. Bob's attorney leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Wait, what do you mean they own the land? Tom slid the deed across the table. See for yourself. A slow, dawning horror spread across their faces as realization took hold. You built a house on land you don't own, Bob's lawyer hissed. You financed a project on property that isn't yours? The bank's attorney shouted, turning to Carlson. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, accusations flying, papers rustling. My parents sat frozen, hearts pounding, watching as the people who had bullied them for months turned on each other. Tom raised his hand calmly. As I said, remove the house. My clients have no interest in trespassers on their property. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. For the first time, Bob looked small. The bank's rep looked pale. The power had shifted and everyone knew it. That day, my parents walked out of that bank lighter than they'd felt in months. They didn't win yet, not fully, but for the first time, justice didn't feel impossible. The tide had turned, and soon every ounce of arrogance and cruelty the bank and Bob had poured into tormenting them would come crashing back with interest. The silence after Tom's final words stretched like a taut wire. You could almost hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the faint buzz of panic crawling through the men who thought they owned everything. My father sat still, trying to absorb what just happened. For months, the bank had treated him like a nobody, a man begging for mercy. Now, in this single moment, he saw the power shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was silent victory. The bank's attorney leaned back, eyes darting across the documents like they were written in fire. Carlson, the bank rep, whispered furiously to Bob, who was already sweating through his expensive shirt. You said the deed was cleared. It was. I thought it was. You thought? You built a $500,000 home on someone else's land, you idiot. The room felt smaller by the second, like the walls were closing in. My parents didn't move, afraid that if they breathed too loudly, this fragile miracle might break. Tom, calm as ever, began to pack his briefcase. Unless there's anything else, gentlemen, we'll expect the house removed within 30 days. Carlson sputtered. Removed? You can't just... We can, Tom said evenly, snapping the latches on his case. You built an unauthorized structure on private property. My clients could charge you rent for every single day that building sits there. Bob's lawyer slammed a palm on the table. You're bluffing. Tom's gaze was ice. Would you like to find out in court? The tone was surgical and not angry, not emotional. Just final. When they walked out of that room, the air felt cleaner, brighter. Even the sunlight seemed to have a different color. My father didn't speak at first. He just stood on the steps of the bank, breathing hard, his fist clenched, not in rage this time, but in release. My mother looked at him, her voice trembling. Did we win? He turned to her slowly, a tired smile forming on his face. No, he said softly. But they finally lost. Over the next few weeks, the small town buzzed with whispers. People who'd once avoided eye contact with my parents now crossed the street to talk. Clerks in stores smiled again. Even the postman nodded with quiet respect. Word spread, the Thompsons beat the bank. Behind closed doors, the bank scrambled. Their lawyers sent letters, then friendly offers, trying to settle. Bob stopped showing up to work for a while. Some said he'd been reassigned. Others whispered he was fired. No one really knew. But what everyone did know was this. That house and that gleaming, empty monument to greed still stood there, on their land. One evening, weeks later, a black sedan pulled up outside their rental house. Carlson stepped out wearing a strained smile. Mr. Thompson, he said, holding a folder. The bank would like to make this right. My father said nothing, motioning him inside. They sat at the small wooden table, The same one where bills and overdue notices once piled high. Carlson cleared his throat. The bank is willing to sell you the house at a reduced rate and provide compensation for the trouble. Tom Grayson had warned them this might happen. He'd said, when they start offering money, that's when you know they're scared. My father leaned back in his chair. You want us to buy a house built without our permission on our land? At a very generous discount, Carlson pressed, voice cracking slightly. You mean, my father said slowly, you want to pay us to take your mistake off your hands? Carlson blinked, caught between confusion and embarrassment. That's one way to look at it. My mother spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, steady, sharper than anyone expected. We'll think about it. But whatever we decide, you'll hear from our attorney. Carlson nodded stiffly and left, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement, the sound of a man walking away from his own pride. Weeks later, the papers were signed. The house, the very same house that had broken them, now legally belonged to them. But the sweetest part? The bank paid them to take it. Every inch of that victory was silent and poetic. No shouting, no revenge fueled by anger. Just quiet justice carved cleanly by the law. They moved in with steady hands and slow smiles. The smell of new paint no longer stung, it smelled like closure. Months later, my father stood at the porch at sunset. The sky burned orange and gold across the hills. He looked at the horizon, the same road he once drove down, full of shame and fear. Now it felt like freedom. My mother joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in destruction, it's in peace. And as the light faded, their home, stood tall against the darkening sky, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. They tried to bury us, but they forgot we were seeds. Imagine saving every penny you have just to build your dream home. You picture warm mornings, your kids playing in the yard, everything you ever wanted. But then your dream turns into a nightmare. The builder messes everything up, the walls are crooked, the garage faces the wrong way, and the kitchen cabinets are nailed straight into drywall. And when you complain, the bank laughs in your face. They threaten you. They lie to you. They treat you like you're nothing. But what they didn't know was that one quiet attorney was about to flip their entire world upside down. And with just one sentence, he made a greedy bank and a careless builder beg for mercy. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone's ever treated you like you don't matter, hit that like button right now. Follow for more real stories where justice actually wins. And get ready, because this revenge isn't loud, it's legendary.